Hello, and welcome to Book Solid, the podcast for young adults, new adults, and the forever young adult at heart. I'm Sam Connell. I use the pronouns she, her, and I'm one of the librarians at New Canaan Library.
I'm Kathleen. I'm the teen librarian at New Canaan Library, and I use the pronouns she, her.
How are you doing, Kathleen?
I'm doing okay. We are starting to maybe see the spring weather coming in, so that's been helping my mood.
I'm starting to believe it's sunny today, but I do want to apologize. I sound muffled and nasally. I'm recovering from a cold and I'm double masked, so I just feel very mumbly today, but hopefully I'll be able to speak with some clarity.
So today we are talking about Genderqueer, which is a graphic memoir by Maia Kobabe, who uses air pronouns. And this is about our journey of self-identity. So it kind of started as a way to explain to Maya's family what it means to be non-binary and asexual. It's combining a personal story with also kind of a guide to gender identity. So we have a lot to talk about and a lot to think about. And we hope that everyone who is listening today and kind of discussing this with us by listening to the podcast and reading the book learns a lot and takes away something from this story.
So Genderqueer was a winner of an Alex Award and a Stonewall Book Award in 2020. It was nominated for an Ignatz Award and the Best Graphic Novel for Teens list from YALSA in 2019. It's in its fifth printing. It's been translated into Spanish, Polish, Czech, and French. It's quite a celebrated book with, as you can tell, lots of accolades. I did want to let you know that if you're new to the podcast, we always talk about the entire book. So if you have not read the book, we recommend pushing pause or stop and read the book. It's a wonderful book, and then come back and listen along as we talk about all of the details of the book.
I think before we started talking about the graphic memoir itself, we wanted to first discuss the pronouns a little bit in case people are not familiar. And I wasn't totally familiar with these pronouns before reading it. So Maia uses air pronouns. So we will be using those throughout to talk about Maia. Sam, you also have some background on these pronouns, right?
Yeah, I learned a lot reading this book. I consider myself a pretty open, a pretty widely read person with lots of different friends and relationships across many different identities and perspectives. Even so, reading this book, I came across these pronouns for the first time in use. I was familiar with they, them. I'm familiar with the challenge in the English language of having non-gendered pronouns. But I actually struggled when Maia talks about in this book using these pronouns. I struggled to adopt them. I've been in this situation before. I've had a close person to me switch in the binary world from he, him pronouns to she, her pronouns. But this was an entirely new thing for me. So I did a little research and wanted to know a little bit of the background of Spivak pronouns, and those are the pronouns Kathleen just explained. So these pronouns started as far back as the 1890s, and if you want to do a Wikipedia dive, it's actually fascinating. There's lots of different pronoun sets. The Rogers in 1890, the Elverson in 1975, and so on. Spivak pronouns are widely accepted by the queer community now. And what's fascinating about this is that Michael Spivak was actually a mathematician. He was this Harvard, Princeton grad. And in writing this pretty complicated book about typesetting in multi-line mathematical statements, which I don't fully understand, Michael Spivak decided to use gender-neutral pronouns. It actually became embraced in this virtual community game. I think it's called Lambda Mu.
Even Maia has this point where at an art class, I believe, there's this teacher who uses they, them pronouns, and there's just like a small sequence there about how everyone really wanted to do their best and was messing up initially, and there was that initial awkward period until they all kind of adapted and were able to to use them really without thinking.
Well, I feel talking about the book, the pronouns, is the biggest challenge. It's such a small part of Maia's journey for our own self-identity. The book is beautifully written. I really quite loved it. I loved the art and the writing. There was so much vulnerability as Maia shares our journey. I think it's really important for people outside the queer community to connect with a personal story, even just one human existence that's a challenge. You get to know Maia so well. You get to know our family, the support system he has, and the ways in which popular culture and social expectations fail him. Through these little vignettes, I think this book is so powerful because through that, anyone outside of this perspective that might challenge or not understand, I have to believe if you read this book, you come away with compassion.
I'm glad you pointed that out. I mean, I think we wanted to start talking about the pronouns as just sort of a way to address maybe a question that our listeners would have, or something that is an initial part of the book that is important to make a distinction about. But overall, it really is such a small part of it. And really, the beauty of the story, I think, is that it's very personal and quiet in a way. There's nothing, it's not like explosions and car chases and but it's also just so fascinating to see the specifics. I think any person's life is, very fascinating. And to have that window in it's just a lovely story to kind of see this journey and the different ideas that Maia is grappling with, and how does he see himself. I really like quiet stories about self-knowledge, because even sometimes those journeys are the most complicated.
I think that this personal testimony is so powerful. It's also very educational. I think if we all walked around with this kind of honesty, there'd be maybe world peace. But I think for people who may be disparaging of selecting your own pronouns or choosing your own journey that doesn't fit into conventional culture, I really love the way Maia explores identity. And you get to see, as the reader, this happy childhood of playing with snakes and being outdoors and fully embracing this own self, and the slow degrees, which I feel that every young adult deals with. When you go from this blind childhood where you just get to be toward this social conformity. This book shows Maia's exploration, not just of identity, but also sexual attraction and behavior. And there's so many different ways that a person can be their own true self, not just with identity, but with the way they choose to live their lives. The honesty with which this journey is shared with us is profound, and I thought beautiful. I absolutely love this book.
I think one of the things you were talking about with childhood, I think it's really interesting too to see that Maia does have these really supportive parents, and they are pretty progressive. This is not the story of Maia just getting acceptance, but rather kind of explaining the nuance of some more specific things that our family doesn't understand. But I do think it's nice to see, this very supportive family, and then how even out of that you can kind of have these questions of, are there gendered expectations? Are there things from the wider world or from your personal world that people don't really think about, that for most people, they aren't coming up against any kind of conflict, so they just kind of go with the flow and don't think about it. And then for Maia, these gendered qualities, or maybe the balance of gender, is not quite what Maia is looking for, is not quite what the world expects of them.
I think that's a really good point. I think this book pointed out to me a binary privilege that most people live with. Maya has such a unique set of challenges through some of the most simple things. For the LGBTQ community, non-gendered bathrooms are really important. And I actually got to live that. I had someone in my family as a child growing up that was challenged every time they stepped into a bathroom publicly, which is, it just was, the microaggressions was really quite terrible for a young child. But I love that you point out, Kathleen, how much love and support is in this book. And Maya actually talks about that in a lot of air interviews, where Maya says this book isn't really about a terrible child or a trauma. I wrote this book as a love letter to my family. He talks about writing this book for himself and really being surprised at how popular it became and how it caught fire, because it was a very straightforward book that he wrote for himself, just to share the love and the honesty with family members.
Yeah, well, I think it is kind of funny just looking at the beginning of the book. It's kind of this whole thing of like, I will never write a personal story. Genderqueer as a concept, as this book that Maya is going to write, that's not in the cards. That's not something. And then it becomes this thing that, I think you're talking about all the accolades that it's gotten. I just think that it's like a beautiful personal story, but also a discussion, which is so great. And just what comes out of that. I think as you said though, because it is that place of familial love and understanding and respect, it kind of asks the reader to meet M there as well. And I like that I feel like as I'm being invited into this conversation, it's gently taking me by the hand, but it's kind of introducing me to maybe concepts that I brushed off, as you said, like the privilege of not always having to think about something like that. It's like we are getting more and more comfortable with the pronouns, which I think is so interesting and so important, because initially there it does feel like I'm struggling, I'm not going to be able to rewire my brain. And then you're like, oh, of course I can. I mean, everyone can. It's just that initial struggle that you have to get over.
It's really funny. Kathleen's been calling me out nonstop every time I mess up the pronouns. And by the way, now that I've done the research that there were, maybe 10 different iterations of named types of pronouns spanning the last 100 years or so, and they all have little nuances, and it's actually fascinating to me. But I love, as you said, Kathleen, the gentle explanation of why. Why are we here? Why are we using Spivak pronouns? I think Maya's story makes me want to be better at it. But I also want to talk a little bit about the other side of it's not all support and roses and loving. Yes, we understand within Maya's group of friends and family. Two really interesting things is the tension with Aunt Shari. So Maya talks about being lucky enough to have not only this great support, right? These wonderful parents that basically let M be themselves throughout their childhood and throughout life, and the conversations that Maya has with heir parents, and this wonderful sister, right? That's we all want to have a sister like this, and she's queer and she's supportive and she helps Maya with cutting her hair and simple things that are just challenging in our mostly binary world. But Aunt Shari, being a lesbian and very pro-female, struggles with Maya's journey and understanding it when Maya seeks to not remove, but move away from birth-assigned female.
I think that is maybe the most fascinating part in the book to me, because there is maybe that expectation that wouldn't happen. And I think maybe even Maya has that expectation, like if anyone is going to be welcoming and get it, it's my Aunt Shari. But I do think that it is kind of this question of how do we see gender? How does, obviously, Maya's aunt being of a different generation, having different struggles, different fights, doesn't necessarily view it the same way. And I think maybe the book really is the best explanation, because I think the scene ends with Maya going home and kind of thinking, okay, that went okay, but I wish it had gone better. And the explanations in the book, kind of the descriptions of that tension of not having, Maya doesn't want to have gendered traits, basically. So the fewer the better. People defaulting to seeing a female person by maybe using female pronouns, so saying I have to take that away. I think all of those concepts are things that are just, how do you communicate that without saying, okay, it doesn't have to do with being female, it has to do with the personal way I see myself. And I guess there's no real resolution within the story, but I do think maybe the story itself is kind of moving toward that resolution. And I don't think there's any bad blood between them. I mean, I think it's just like an interesting, these two kinds of views of the world that don't necessarily align.
Yeah, and I do, I think what this book really takes us by the hand and says sometimes there doesn't need to be a resolution. There doesn't need to be a decision. There doesn't need to be an end point or a separation or a boundary. You think about the scope and breadth of the human existence. We are extremely complicated. I think it's a healthy thing to challenge these definitions and labels that don't fit at necessarily everyone.
Right. And yeah, it has to be, at the end of the day, it's about the person, right? So it is, and I think that's one of the things is that Maya, just by being self, when you introduce pronouns that people aren't familiar with, or you try to bring up a concept that maybe they've never thought of, some people will interpret that as confrontational, right? And they'll say, well, this is not, I guess what they mean is this is not part of my worldview, but sometimes they'll just be like, this is not the world or something. And so you have to have an open mind to say, like, no, I just have one part of the world that I understand. Someone has a different understanding. And I think the unfortunate thing is sometimes that ends up becoming, viewed as political or something, just purely expressing how you interact with the world and how you see yourself and how you would like others to see you, which of course you have the right. Because I know that there's this point where Maya is debating, like, these pronouns are unwieldy. Can I really ask someone, even though I love them, even though I can express how much I love them and how much they make my heart sing, can I ask someone to deal with that discomfort? And basically is told, someone's getting the discomfort, right? Is it going to be you for the rest of your life, or is it going to be this person for 5 minutes?
It's so interesting that you say that, because I was listening to an interview. Maya talks about that while E has adopted these pronouns and finds joy and a centering in them, Maya picks and chooses their moments for important relationships and, maybe setting the tone for a 5-day convention. I will have this conversation, but he's very clear about, I'm not going to ask my waiter at a restaurant. I don't want to have that conversation right now. And so you're right about these sort of micro moments of, do I dare eat a peach? Sorry, I can't help myself. It's T.S. Eliot. And I have so much compassion for that. This is who I want to be. This is how I want to be treated. And yet I don't want to have a political conversation when I'm ordering my coffee.
I don't know that there's an answer to that or a way to think about that, but I know, even at the end, kind of this question of, am I going to be out to these children that I'm teaching? Am I going to bring this to the table as I'm having a 2-minute conversation with their parents? It's tough because it's one of those things that at once you understand why and you don't think it should be. So I understand why there's this hesitation and is it worth it, and the struggle that E goes through trying to figure out, do I mention my pronouns? Do I mention that I'm not female? Because there's this part where Maya is referred to as a female teacher or role model. For a tiny moment, how much of myself do I put out there? How much of anyone's self do they put out there? And I think we all kind of maybe brush off like, well, this is a tiny interaction. What counts as like a significant human moment between people?
I really like how the book ended almost with like an open-ended, do I do this now? When do I do this? How do I do this? And Maya's journey has multiple moments of quote unquote coming out, because not just in terms of deciding to share that E might be bisexual and then deciding that it's really a non-binary existence is the center of the identity. But then there's this whole part of the LGBTQ community and the queer community being very sexual, being very pro-liberated, embracing of sex and romance, and seeing that in pop culture and embracing queer identities in these roles. And Maia takes a pretty big stand about being asexual and how that's almost problematic for M, because E sees this world where we sort of push sexuality on individuals as something that's a little problematic.
Yeah, I think it's the idea of gender identity and sexual attraction and behaviors, all of these things kind of getting grouped together in whatever variety of boxes, but kind of the idea that they're all going to exist somewhere. I think it is interesting, and it's not something, I think with everything else going on in the text, everything else that needs explanation, the asexuality almost kind of gets pushed to the wayside, but this is also a big part of who Maia is and part of this journey that we're reading about.
And so we have to talk about the big elephant in the room. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Is that the saying? My friends used to make fun of me. I get all sorts of sayings wrong. Like, I'm just as likely to say, now's the time to talk about the large camel standing in the corner. So, unfortunately, this book has received a lot of challenges. As librarians, Kathleen and I are very aware. And interestingly enough, Maia spent over 10 years working in libraries. I think there's a real connection for me with that. Especially, we didn't even talk about the fact that E tracks every book ever read, which is incredible. Graphs them, no less, and doodles them. It's quite beautiful. But unfortunately, this book has been challenged quite a bit. We're actually seeing a lot of book challenges across the country. The American Library Association noted a large uptick, I think something like 30%. And we're seeing a lot of politics being fought out in literature. And I think where it's really all converging in a lot of emotions are in school systems and in curriculum. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. And this podcast is really for readers of both young adult and new adult, and it's for teens and adults. It's pretty much for anyone. I think it's important that as an adult, there's this assumption that we all have the freedom to read whatever we'd like to read, but there's always this scrutiny when it comes to that gray area with teens.
Well, one of the great things is when you brought up this book to me, it was prior to me hearing about this, even though this has kind of already started going on. So I wasn't reading with any kind of critical eye to what they could possibly have an objection to. And then when I reread it closer to when we were recording, I was like, okay, so now that I've heard this, what am I going to see? Because I wasn't aware of what would be offensive really the first time. And now, and I think the thing is that there are definitely, we're seeing this a lot with like books that are about either by LGBTQ creators or about characters and also people of color. There tends to be a pretty clear trend. Who are the characters? Who are the writers of these stories? But I think with this book, I'd have to believe that the people who are so offended truly have not read it. One of the things that I believe Maia has mentioned, maybe not in the book itself, but in interviews, is how this would be so helpful to teenage Maia, right? And this is a book that is going to be addressing what actual teens are thinking about, are unsure about, need guidance on. And it's not anything, as we said, it's not really something that has answers so much as it helps you along with the questions, and it gives you the space to figure some things out.
I'm so glad you said that. It's the perfect segue, because guess what? I don't have a quote, because this is our first graphic novel, graphic memoir. And I really didn't know how to come up with a quote, but I found a little snippet of an interview. This is an interview from NPR's 1A. This is from last November. And Maia actually directly addresses a little bit of the why and the audience. So have a listen.
Like I said, I had like an adult audience in mind, but usually when people ask me, I say it's appropriate for high school and above. And usually I say that because I, as a freshman in high school, was wrestling with all of the same questions and confusions and themes that my book talks about. And I was really searching for this type of information. I was like desperately looking for books about trans and non-binary identities, characters, and just like what it looked like to be like an adult queer person. And so like I wanted that information so much at that age.
I think that, I mean, that's the perfect explanation of, or the perfect rebuttal to any kind of resistance to this book. And so I also wanted to point out, just happens to be great timing, that we have a program coming up, and this is in partnership with New Canaan Cares, but it's called Supporting LGBTQ and Questioning Youth. This is going to be an in-person program at our local community center. Seth Wallace, the Assistant Director of the Yale Office of LGBTQ Resources and a clinician at Yale Mental Health and Counseling, to present this interactive workshop for parents and caregivers. So basically, people who want to understand and support their LGBTQ or questioning youth, but maybe have some questions and don't know always what the best way is to be supportive. So it will examine the impact of family support on well-being and mental health outcomes, and also give strategies for handling unfamiliar terminology. It's for any families with children ages 10 plus.
If you want to find out more about that program, you can go to our website, newcanaanlibrary.org, and you can get more about that program and register. There's some really concerning statistics about the LGBTQ plus community with depression and even some of the stats on likelihood of self-harm. I do believe that library is sanctuary for all, and I encourage anyone to seek resources. They are out there. Okay, do you have any read-alikes for us?
I do have read-alikes, and yeah, so I was trying to kind of stick in the realm of graphic novels and memoirs. The first read-alike I thought of immediately was Alison Bechdel's work, who, I mean, most people have probably heard of Fun Home. She's also done Are You My Mother?, Secret to Superhuman Strength. I love all of her work. So it's very, they're memoirs, so they are deeply personal, but they are in that graphic novel comic format. So yeah, I feel like she's kind of a trailblazer for telling these complex stories in a medium that I think sometimes people are dismissive of. And I think that's one thing that we didn't really talk about, but you can really have something profound to say in this format. And I think sometimes it's the best way to present this information because there is something very immediate about seeing the pictures with the text. So I would recommend anything by her if you like the graphic memoir. Also, this was sort of had a graphic element, sort of a text element. So this is a visual guide, really. So it's called How to They Them, a visual guide to non-binary pronouns in the world of gender fluidity by Stuart Getty. And this is like just a nice short book if you're having trouble or if you're not confident that you're going to be using the right pronouns. It kind of, again, takes you by the hand and helps you if you're having trouble kind of grasping the concept or you're messing up a lot or something. It's just a really easy way to kind of lay everything out there and think, oh, okay, now I get it. And we also have on Hoopla, I just wanted to bring up the Quick and Easy Guide series. So we have Quick and Easy Guide to They Them Pronouns by Archie Bongiovanni and To Queer and Trans Identities by Maddie G. So lots of like little short books that you can read in an hour, but have so much information and are so helpful. And then finally, How to Be Ace, a memoir of growing up asexual by Rebecca Burgess. And this is another, again, a graphic memoir. And this is about asexuality and again, kind of the journey that they go through with realizing that the struggles, you know, of other people not understanding or even not understanding, even when they don't understand themselves. So Sam, what are we reading next?
Okay, so we kind of took a sharp left turn down this season because we were reading quite a few novels, and we've just read our first graphic book forever for this podcast. What I'm really excited about is that the next book we're reading is called Ain't Burned All the Bright by Jason Reynolds and Jason Griffin. And I'm kind of excited because April is National Poetry Month, and Jason Reynolds is one of my favorite poets. I know that Kathleen doesn't really like poetry. Can I say that?
I would like to defend that you said we will never do poetry because I don't like poetry, and that was absolutely true. And then I brought up that I had actually liked this book of poetry, and it was probably the only one we could do because I liked it. But so yeah, I'm open to this one.
Do you remember our very first podcast was a book and verse? Blood, Water, Paint. Yeah. And you liked that one.
I love poetry.
Do you? Wait a minute. Maybe.
I did love that book. So yeah, so now we're coming back to our roots.
Yeah, so I'm excited. I actually really enjoy poetry and books in verse. I even quoted T.S. Eliot today. I might have to go back and read that, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. I love it so much. Anyway, so Ain't Burned All the Bright is a collaboration between Jason Reynolds and Jason Griffin. It is a really interesting format. So Jason Griffin is an artist, and he's shown his art in major cities all over the world. And he's actually collaborated with Jason Reynolds before. And Jason Reynolds, I'm a huge fan. Maybe I have a crush on him. He's a #1 New York Times bestselling author. I mean, his accolades just are endless. Newbery Award honoree, a Prince Award honoree, 2-time National Book Award finalist, a Kirkus Award winner, a Carnegie Medal. Do you want me to keep going?
We can save this for the next podcast.
So he's also the national ambassador for young people's literature, and I actually follow him on social media. He's wrote some of the most profound seminal work from the Black American perspective, like All American Boys and Long Way Down. And so what this book is a collaboration of Reynolds' poetry with Griffin's art. And it's in this mixed media collage format. And it's a reflection on the threats facing today's contemporary Black family. I'm really excited about it. I used to do a program for the teens here pretty regularly called Altered Books, which we'll put some stuff on the website for you guys to take a look at. So this is going to be a really interesting read coming at us. I also felt Genderqueer was a really interesting read for us. The graphic format, the pronouns, just the conversation was challenging. And honestly, challenging things are worth doing.
I agree. All right, so until next time.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Bye.